The best espresso I had all year didn't come from my $6,000 espresso machine. It came from this, the Cafelat Robot. And the question that you have to ask is, how is that actually even possible? The robot has no electrics, no temperature control, no sensors, no automation, and it's actually modeled off of a very old design. How can it come out ahead of all the premium gear that I own when it comes to making espresso? Gear that is top of the line, used in commercial cafe settings, and designed for one thing: quality espresso. It's been a little over a year since I've reviewed the robot, and over the course of that year, something very interesting has happened. We have our Marzocco Linea Mini over there set to automatically turn on every morning. And over there, actually, we have another little counter. And that's where I do a lot of my testing and other types of coffee brewing. And over the past year, I noticed myself, pulling the robot out again and again and setting it over there and using it instead of the Marzocco. So in this video, we're going to ask, after a year of use of this thing, how does it win out over a $6,000 espresso machine? And secondly, we're going to ask, should you consider a machine like this? And I think in some cases, the answer to that question is absolutely not. But the main thing that the robot has over a pump-driven espresso machine is something that is actually a little bit hard to define and has a lot of individual facets to it. And I call it the just works factor. For some reason, with the Cafelat Robot, and you can go and look this up online and see people talking about this, it just is really easy to get a fantastic result out of this coffee maker. Now, I think there are some mechanical reasons for that, but there also is a little bit of an X factor to this thing, this sort of convergence and confluence of factors that add up together in the robot to net out a really positive result without a lot of fuss. Now, why is that? Well, when I make coffee, I tend to switch coffees a lot, actually. It's not uncommon for me to have 6 bags of coffee on the go at any given time, or even more, and that's not including the coffees that we roast ourselves and are drinking on a regular basis. And when you're using a pump-driven machine and you go to dial in a new coffee, you open the bag of coffee, you take a guess on the grind setting, you do your puck prep, and then you press go. And sometimes you get lucky and you get a really good shot the first time. More often though, your first shot or 2 or 3 is not actually the greatest, and you have to keep making adjustments and then pulling another shot until you get something that you're happy with. And that's because once you hit that go button on a pump-driven espresso machine, for the most part, a few machines accepted, what happens after that is totally out of your control. The machine is basically executing a predefined program, and if you need to intervene because things are going sideways a little bit with the espresso shot, there isn't really any mechanism where you can do that. And the robot and machines like it are a little unique in that when I go to dial in a new coffee, I can almost always have a really good result right from the very first shot. Now, what some people love about the robot is not actually the dial-in process. It's the ability to hone and tune everything with a very high degree of precision. Some people even use these aftermarket pressure sensors and Bluetooth scales and apps to get a very, very specific result. And you can do that for not actually a ton of money, but it's not what I love about this coffee maker the most. For me, the real magic in the robot is the ability to open that brand new bag of coffee and very quickly, easily, and cleanly make a shot of espresso that you are almost positive is going to taste fantastic, absolutely every single time. And the natural question, of course, is how exactly is this doing that? Most of the time, when an espresso shot goes sideways, it's for one of 2 reasons. Either, number 1, the grind is too fine, which results in a stalled and very often bitter shot, or the grind is too coarse, which results in a sort of gushing, fast-flowing, and very sour shot. And the robot helps you get around both of those situations in a very unique way. See, if you load in your coffee and you're pressing down the arms and there's no pressure there and it's very obvious that things are starting to come out very quickly, you can actually salvage that shot by just easing up on the pressure. Don't let those arms come down too fast. Just guide them down really, really slowly at an appropriate flow rate. That's going to lengthen out the length of your shot and result in a cup of coffee that is usually very good. Now, sometimes in those cases, I'll also pull a little bit longer of a ratio, which can help. That basically means a higher volume of coffee. And conversely, on the other side, if you load in your coffee and you start pressing down on the arms and it just is way too firm and you're not seeing anything come out right away, and then when you do, it seems like it's coming out really slowly and it's obvious that you've ground too fine. All you need to do with this machine is just let it sit there for a second and the puck will saturate with water a little bit more. And the longer you let it sit, the easier it'll be to press down. And then at a certain point, you just start guiding down the arms and don't pay attention to the time too much. Maybe pull a little bit shorter ratio than you were planning on. And it's also very likely that you'll get a good cup of coffee. Now, I think in that case that the declining temperature profile of the robot also helps to make the shot more forgiving. But the result is that even if you make a mistake on your grind size, which would have you pooched on a pump-driven machine, you can end up with really, really good tasting coffee out of a machine like the robot. Now, really quickly, because I know I'm going to get asked for this, what is my baseline for using the Cafelat Robot? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. Usually I grind an 18 to 20 gram dose, and I have that here. And when it comes to puck prep, I use a blind shaker, or this is a blind tumbler, actually. I just lift it, let the grounds drop into the portafilter. I'll just do a little swirl, just like that. Take my tamper, tamp it down. I put the screen on, and I fill it up with water just off boil. I load it into the bottom of the robot, drop my scale on there and my espresso cup, and then using a shot mirror, I just start to pull down on the arms of the robot really slowly over about 10 to 15 seconds for a nice slow pre-infusion. Then once I start to see even beating onto the bottom of the basket, I will press down a little bit more firmly and I'll ramp up the pressure, watching for the flow rate on my scale and going up to about 2 mil per second. And if you don't have a scale that measures that, you can just sort of eyeball that. And I'll keep pulling, not even really watching the time too much until I get somewhere in between a 1 to 2.5 to 1 to 3 ratio. Then once I have that, I'll ease up the pressure and pull out my espresso glass, put another one underneath, and press down until I hear a slight hiss. Now, usually I shoot for a pressure of somewhere between 4 to 6 bar. And very often, if I'm kind of in the right neighborhood, it will net out around 45 to 50 seconds, somewhere in there. And the coffee, I haven't made this coffee on the robot before, and it worked perfectly. That is really good. This is actually one of our new coffees. Fantastic. And the magic of the robot for me is the ability to balance in a very intuitive way the variables of pressure, flow rate, ratio, and be able to mold them into what ends up being a really great shot of espresso, really actually pretty easily. Now, I've used the robot with and without paper filters on both the top and bottom of the puck. I've used it with and without all those fancy sensors. The truth is, it almost doesn't even matter what you do with it. As long as you are balancing those variables, you're probably going to end up with a very enjoyable cup of coffee. And really, when it comes to balancing those variables, all you actually need to do with it is, if it's flowing too fast, you just use a lot less pressure until it flows at an appropriate rate. Or if it's flowing too slow, you just let it pre-infuse for a little longer and be patient. Now, the question is, should you be making coffee on one of these instead of the pump-driven espresso machine that you already have or you're maybe looking at? And to be honest, I think the answer for a lot of people is actually absolutely not. And we're going to talk about why that is, but I do want to give one really quick tip to robot users first. I love the minimal, fast, and easy workflow of the robot. And one thing that I get asked about a lot is actually preheating it, which is a whole other step and process in the workflow of using it. And you can see I didn't actually do that. You see, The design of the robot is such that the basket is actually very good at insulating. It doesn't have a huge thermal mass, and it's suspended away from the sides of the portafilter in here. So in terms of temperature stability, this is actually a pretty smart design in here that they've got. And it's not going to suck up a lot of heat from your water or your coffee. What can suck up a lot of heat is this right here, the plunger. It's this big hunk of metal hanging down, goes right down into your basket. And when people talk about preheating the robot, most of the time they're talking about this thing right here. And the way that I get around needing to preheat this thing and still get good results, even with light roasts, is actually pretty simple. When I put my coffee in here and pour my water that's basically just off boil into here, and then attach it to the bottom of the robot with the plunger pulled up like this, the heat can only get sucked out of the water and transfer to the plunger if the plunger is actually touching the water. If there's an air gap in there, it's actually not going to transfer the heat to the plunger anywhere nearly as meaningfully. So all that I do is I fill up the basket enough to get the ratio of coffee that I want, but not so full that the plunger is actually going to touch the water when I start pushing it down. And as long as I do that, just make sure that the plunger's not wet when I am all finished up here, I can get a really good result with no preheating, even with really, really light roasted coffees. Now, turbo shots and soup shots, I'm going to save all that for a whole other video, but I want to get back to the main question. If I can get a better shot of espresso more easily and more quickly out of a machine like this than I can out of a pump-driven machine, should I maybe get rid of the pump-driven machine that I already have? And as I said already, I think the answer for most people is actually no. And that's because an espresso machine, or really coffee making of any kind, needs to fit into your lifestyle. It can't go the other way around. And a machine like the robot, or any other machine for that matter, does kind of force you into a certain way of using it. Let me give you an example. The most obvious place where you see this is when it comes to milk-based drinks. A lot of people who like espresso and espresso-based drinks also happen to love milk drinks. Lattes, cappuccinos, flat whites, that kind of thing. Now, Sarah and I happen to drink mostly espresso and Americano, with milk drinks only being an occasional thing. But for a lot of people, milk drinks are actually the main thing when it comes to espresso. And obviously, the robot has no mechanism to steam milk. Now, there are a lot of electric frothers that you can get, or even stovetop steamers that will do a good job. I'll be honest though, if milk drinks are your main thing, a traditional espresso machine with a steam wand offers all of that workflow in a very nice, contained, and convenient package. Something like this may be actually more of a pain. Another example where a machine like this may actually be quite inconvenient is if you're hosting company. The robot can do a really great shot really quickly without a lot of dialing in one time or 2 times. But if you're in a situation where you need to, say, make 10 coffees or even worse, 10 lattes in a row, it's going to be a really frustrating and tedious experience for both you and your guests if you're using one of these. Pump-driven espresso machines, they weren't actually designed originally for homes at all. They were actually designed for cafes where you're doing a lot of volume. And that's where they shine, when you're doing volume. So if you host people often and you find yourself in a situation where you need to make a lot of espresso drinks all in a row on a regular basis, those types of machines can be a great use for that. And machines like this, maybe not. But if you don't need to do volume like that all the time, a machine like this is really enjoyable. And I'll say the last case where you may want to look in another direction besides a machine like this is if you value one-touch convenience. When you get into the flow of using these things, you minimize your steps. You can make a coffee without a lot of things to remember. It still is more things to remember than walking up and touching a button and having a coffee come out. So if you're not into ritual, into slowness, a machine like this may not be a good direction either. Now, that being said, for me personally, walking up to this thing and using it, I love the minimalism of it. And that's probably a hidden factor to what has helped it to sustain in my coffee routine over the last year. Fits into the decor of our house. It's not dominating. It's kind of cute to look at. It's very clean on the counter, no wires. Especially you pair it with a manual grinder. I often use it with the Weber Workshops HD2, which is a totally over-the-top manual grinder, but very fun to use. Whether you're using that or traditional hand grinder, you just have this setup where you're not using any electronics, no touch screens, no buttons, just a very tactile espresso experience that results in a cup that is better than you can get with all those bells and whistles. It almost even kind of makes you feel like you got a bit of a coffee superpower. You know, it's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm definitely a fan, obviously, of manual espresso, and I feel like I could cover that a lot more on this channel. Those are my thoughts after a year with the Cafelat Robot. What do you think? I'd love to know, because really I'm almost of two minds about this. Is this too much fuss and expense when you can get espresso out of a pump-driven machine? Or is the pump-driven machine too much fuss and expense when you can get great espresso out of a machine like this? I'd love to hear your take on that in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.